Okay, we'll start right at 11.
Good morning. Welcome to the September 24th, 2018 Utah Division of Drinking Water webinar. This month, you get me presenting to you primarily, but also in the room, we have Rachel Cassidy and Janet Lee from the rules section. And the big focus today is going to be on reporting violations. This is something that's come up a few times, and we tend to get a lot of questions about where they come from and how they happen and what it means when operators see them on their IPS reports. But additionally, for any of the local health departments that are joining in or other sort of water assistance agencies out there, it's good to have this vocabulary and this background when water systems ask you for technical support or have a knowledge of what these are. And I can promise you that if you call the office and get me first, you'll be directed to this webinar to watch before you call back and ask the question again. And then you can call back and ask how you got there and what happened with it. But I doubt that you will need it by that time. A few quick reminders and announcements leading in. This is September 30th is right around the corner. That is the end of lead and copper sample season. If you are on 3-year or 6-month monitoring for lead and copper, and this is your year, you need to complete that sample now. And you need to check WaterLink and see that we've gotten your samples so that we can make sure that you avoid the violations that will be run. Lead and copper is a high priority. If you get a monitoring violation for that, it cascades. So please, please, please check your WaterLink monitoring schedule and let us know about the lead and copper. Some announcements. AWWA Intermountain Conference is happening October 10th through the 12th in Midway, Utah. If you have more questions on that, you can watch last month's webinar presented by Elaine Boyd of the American Water Works Association to talk about what they are offering there and how to register and attend. And we will all be there to answer all of your questions. You can just speak up, Rachel. It's fine. This is free flowing.
Rules section will be there, people.
Rules section will be there. We will have consult room and ability to help you with questions you have on any of the regulatory changes or items that are happening with your water system now. Additionally, the AWWA has a leadership forum nomination. If you have people in your organization who you're eyeing or looking to move into leadership within it, this is a forum presented by the American Water Works Association to help prepare future leaders within the water industry. Their submission deadline is October 19th, and you can check their website for more information. October 30th, 2018, the Utah Rural Water Association is presenting their half-day training in conjunction with the Division of Drinking Water staff in Nephi on disinfection best practices. This is a great opportunity and something we've covered heavily in both webinars and on-site trainings and through compliance and enforcement recently. If you're having questions on batch chlorination and what that is, seasonal startup type questions, anything along that line, and you are in the Nephi area or able to travel, please try and make that a priority for you going into the fall season. We know it's right before Halloween, but if you'd like to come in costume, you are welcome to do so. In fact, highly encouraged.
Please.
Highly encouraged to attend in costume.
Entertainment.
End of third quarter, 2018 sampling is September 30th. Also right around the corner. If you're on quarterly sampling for anything, please check and make sure that we have those samples in. Check your WaterLink report, check your monitoring schedule. And guess what this entire webinar is about? Checking your monitoring schedule and making sure we have that information. If you need help on WaterLink, there is a webinar titled WaterLink 101 that will tell you how to use our WaterLink tool and better guide you through that. Rural Water is presenting their water conservation certification October 25th through 26th. This is extremely important going into the future of water in Utah. Utah is an extremely dry state and it's not getting any wetter. Please look at how you can take this conservation training and better implement conservation practices in your water system. And this is a great opportunity. It's here in Salt Lake, and you can contact more information there through the Rural Water Association website. News. Big changes coming from the Division of Drinking Water. There's an IPS rule revision. Today, the points are posted at ips.utah.gov and how that rule change will impact IPS points in Utah. Please go take a look at that. The WaterLink portal is up and running, and if you don't have one, you're going to need one. This is a way that we're going to be accepting information going forward about water system, operator changes, personnel changes throughout your water system, contact information. In the future, it'll probably be even grander than that. We're going to look at sample site plans eventually at some point, right? Or CCRs will go through there.
Document upload.
So if you don't have a WaterLink portal account, get one. Again, covered in the WaterLink 101 training. Myrtle.utah.gov is still live. If you have those Myrtle violations, contact us and figure out how to get rid of them and what you need to do to fix that. You can submit your monthly residual disinfectant level through myrtle.utah.gov. Right now, it's one of the highest number of violations we have in the state. It's pushing some systems that were previously never a compliance or enforcement system into that category. And if you don't understand it, contact us, watch any number of the Myrtle webinars we've done to cover that and get the Myrtle information in. If you have a significant deficiency on your water system, we've created requestcap.utah.gov. This is for you to request what is called a corrective action plan. And the corrective action plan is informal enforcement. It's basically an extension on the time you need to correct the significant deficiency. If you've been surveyed this year, if you've had a level 1 or level 2 assessment that has identified a significant deficiency, request cap.utah.gov. If you do not request a cap before the timeline expires to address that deficiency, you are in threat of sort of EPA overfile enforcement. It triggers triggers a health-based violation, and you pop up on our radar. And we cannot do a cap after that timeline has elapsed. After that 120 days, or it's 30 days for a level 2, right, Janet?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We cannot go back and give a cap after that. We have to go with an enforcement action to address the violation and the deficiency. So please, if you have that, check your IPS report. And if you see a significant deficiency on there, go to requestcap.utah.gov. Some more going back on the IPS revision. The timeline is put before you to take a look at. September through November, which we are in now, is the discuss, educate, and get your comments in on that rule change. So make yourself aware, visit that table, look at it, ask questions, get yourself educated on how that will update and change your water system and compliance going forward. January 2019 through March 2019, we're going to share the impact and show side by side of how the current IPS works and how the future IPS works. We're still updating that on our end so that we can make it dynamic and have it working correctly for you, but that's when that will roll out. To April of 19, April through October of 19, so most of next year, we'll begin the rule change process. This is a generally long process where we draft the rule, put the rule through the Division of Administrative Rules, prepare the financial impact statement, and go through all of the arduous stuff that none of you actually care that much about. But it will set out the implementation timeline of January 2020, and it also opens the official public comment period for that rule change. If you have questions before you call and ask them, watch the webinar on the IPS revision timeline that was in, did you do that in August? But yeah. Why are we doing the IPS revision? It's gonna be, there we go. Align the point values and ensure that the risk to public health drives the point totals. Right now, one of the things we're seeing with IPS points is that they don't always correspond correctly with what EPA considers a health-based violation or what we consider a greater risk to public health. We'll have better alignment between those two values that Division of Drinking Water is committed to protecting. We're going to look and see if credit points are masking deficiencies. You can right now receive up to, I think it's 20 points of negative. It kind of gives you sort of a mulligan on some points, and those, if can, cover up deficiencies and keep you below a threshold to address them for a longer period of time than is deemed safe to public health or to meet our regulatory requirements as an agency. We're going to better align IPS with the ETT. And ETT is not a term that most of you hear often. It's electronic targeting, enforcement targeting tool. And that is the EPA's version of IPS. Their threshold goes to 11 rather than 100 or 120 or 150. And their points are different. They don't look at anything but elapsed timelines on significant deficiencies, for example. They tend to have a heavier weight on monitoring violations and MCL violations. This will better align those two. Earlier this year, we issued an enforcement order against a water system that had well below the threshold on IPS points, but was well above on the ETT. And so we are trying to better align those. It's going to have a better efficiency for us, and that we won't have to sort of issue enforcement orders to systems that are still showing approved on our system. It's going to update that. It's going to be simpler. I believe, how many pages was it originally? And now it's going down to like
I don't
4.
know. It's like 40 pages right now. It's going to go down to 3 or 4.
It's going to go down to 3 or 4. This is going to be easier for your operators to understand, easier for us to regulate, easier for water systems to comply with. We've been working on this since 2017. There's been a large work group. We've engaged multiple points of view and done a collaborative process to reach this. And it has been a lot of sausage making that we don't really want to talk about, but it is, I think everybody feels good moving forward about where we're at now. Open for public comment. There's fee changes. There's a fee hearing for all of DEQ on October 9th. There's nothing new for drinking water except we intend to implement existing fee created in 2015. That's the after the fact plan approval fee. Systems with unapproved facilities have until March 15 of 2019 to submit the necessary information to complete the after-the-fact plan reviews by a division of drinking water. So if you have a facility that does not have an operating permit or plan approval from the Division of Drinking Water, now is the time to start addressing that. Call our office and ask for the permitting section if you have questions on that. If you have unapproved facilities and have not received that operating permit after March 15th of 2019, the Division of Drinking Water will begin to assess a $1,000 fee per project. There's going to be a guidance doc about that fee on our website. It's not there yet.
Not that I've seen.
Okay. All right. That brings us through news and reminders and all of the up-to-date stuff, which is really one of the most important parts of these monthly webinars, is that you stay current on what is happening. So thank you all who are watching live, and to those of you watching later, hopefully it's not past the deadline that we sent to remind you on. Sampling basics and reporting violations. These are by far the most numerous violations we issue as a division, are sampling and then the subsequent reporting violations that come through it. Water quality in Utah is generally good. We issue relatively few MCL violations comparatively to many other states, which we're happy about, but we still issue a lot of failure to sample violations. So let's focus in on some of these today. Some sampling basics, sample labeling, violations that come from those. What are these reporting violations? How to avoid all violations, and how to go through that. So we'll go ahead and start with some sampling basics. And Janet, this is where you are welcome to chime in at any time. This is slightly more freeform than we normally do, but I like it. It's a little more podcasty.
Yes, very true.
Which I'm in favor of. I would love to start a water podcast. Let's take a look. Let me see, I have a pointer over here. Sampling basics. There's really 2 places you're going to be sampling in a water system. You're going to be looking at samples in your distribution system and at your source or your point of entry into your distribution system. Distribution system samples are generally coliform bacteria, disinfection byproduct, lead and copper, and asbestos. Asbestos is a special one because it shows up both in distribution system and at the source or entry point of the distribution system. And what we mean by entry point is you may have a sampling station that you are able to sample from your source, not directly at the well, but before it hits any treatment or hits a customer, hits a tap. A lot of times this is where some of the confusion comes up when we hit labeling, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But that's just sort of what we mean when we say entry point to a distribution system. It's someplace that it's hitting before treatment, including chlorination, or hitting the tap. If it's a group source, that has to be approved through us, but we can talk a little bit more about that as well. At the source, what you're going to be looking at is nitrate and nitrite in organics, metals, VOCs, pesticides, radionuclides, and sulfate. And asbestos is the unique one because you have to have your source within an identified geologic area identified as naturally occurring asbestos or asbestos dumps. Yeah, by a formation of asbestos. Unique sampling. These are fun ones that
Very fun.
Very fun for all of us involved. Long-term enhanced round 2 or LT2 sampling. Rachel, why don't you talk a little bit about that, since I don't know much about it.
This is for surface water treatment systems, or if you have a UDI source under the direct influence of surface water. Depending on your population, you have to sample the raw water for E. coli and or crypto for a period of time to assess what treatment should follow, depending on what kind of bugs you're trying to get rid of in the source water. So it's raw water. Michelle Darris here at the rural section is the rural manager for that. And you would know if you have an LT2 schedule that's current, that's active, because if you check your monitoring schedule on WaterLink, it'll say LT2 E. coli sampling. It's typically every other week for a certain period of time, depending on your particular circumstance.
Right. And that differs from a coli at the source sampling, which comes as the result of a positive BAC-T sample in the distribution system. We call those triggered source samples, and that's Janet's wheelhouse. We see a lot of those because someone gets the positives and they go do the routines, but they fail to take it at a groundwater source, right? Is that what mostly happens, or is it mostly mislabeling?
That's right. There's two types of sampling under groundwater rule. One is, as you mentioned, COLT is for the triggered source sampling, but there's also an assessment source sampling, which are for sources that are unique, that maybe didn't have a well grout or has a history of potential problems, has some geology issues. We'll put systems on a 12-month sampling where they take a routine sample for E. coli. We call that assessment monitoring.
Assessment monitoring, great. And then surface water treatment, those are our systems who obviously are treating for surface water, and they're looking at total organic carbon, TOCA, total organic carbon,
And alkalinity.
and alkalinity. And those are monthly reports that go to Michelle Darris. And if you're a surface water system, hopefully you're well aware of that. If not, get with Michelle and she will guide you gently or not so gently through that process. UCMR, Unregulated Contaminants Monitoring Rule. This is a special one. It's actually the one that most of us who are sort of science backgrounds get geeked about, because it's looking to the future, and it's really a large scale study that's primarily managed by EPA, and it's looking at what we could regulate in the future. And part of any time EPA determines a new standard, a new rule to monitor, part of that is determining is how big the problem is. If they believe that there is a problem for an element, they first have to understand if that actually exists. So systems are selected and they are put on sort of a test monitoring schedule to look and see if there is enough occurrence of it to warrant future regulation. That's one part of sort of future regulation, and we are in UCMR 4, the 4th iteration. This is a 6-year cycle?
Oh goodness, it depends on the system.
It depends on the system, yeah. But I think it's roughly, for the analyte list is every 6 years, yeah. So and Brandy Smith is the contact for that in this office. If you're one of those systems, congratulations on being part of the future of water. I'm sure that's how you look at it entirely.
And the state of Utah does not regulate UCMR. EPA does directly. So Brandy, her job is not to send you violations if you haven't sampled. It's just to help you coordinate with the EPA rule managers.
Right. Sampling basics. Distribution system sampling requires sampling for, as we said before, RTCR, DBP, and lead and copper, and sometimes asbestos, but we're going to just sort of ignore that for the rest of the presentation because it is fairly rare in Utah, and we'll focus on the big ones. I'm going to put anything up here. This is basically a look at a monitor or at a sample site plan for a TCR system. And you can kind of see what they have listed out here is an address for where they're sampling, the sample point code, and the month that they plan on sampling for that. Many, if not, I think all of you are extremely familiar now with sample site plans. If not, if you don't have one, please get one. How many do we have left? You sent out a query recently, Janet, on how many we had.
Probably about 100.
We have about 100 systems out there that we have not gotten one of these on. Additionally, getting a map to us of where those are is a requirement of that. It's really the only way for us to assess accurately that you're covering your distribution system and getting all points throughout it. This becomes really important when there's a positive TC sample, that we can look and see that you're getting repeats in the right location to ensure that know where you're up and downstream. And that if there's a big emergency, like an E. coli outbreak, it helps us identify where that's coming from and how many people may be impacted. It allows us to target in better on where to direct resources and get response to that. So it is both a benefit to you as well as to us. The one I like about this is it also has laboratory information down here, so that the water system, if someone else were to come in and take over that water system, they have people to call on where to get help and follow up and where to take samples, as well as when to do it and how to do some of that and some of that labeling. Is there anything else you want to add there, Janet?
No, that covers it. Having the map and the schedule, both of them. Often I'll just get maps in or just schedules, but we need both.
We need both. That's good to know. And it is also important to know that the map, this is a really good map, but we're open to helping with maps and helping you find resources to get maps on that. If you're a small system,
simple drawing is just adequate.
Yeah, we can. If you're a small enough system that you can do a good drawing of your system, we've accepted those. But really, we are looking for some visual representation there of how the system is laid out.
Right.
I have been training on how to label samples since my very first training at the Division of Drinking Water. John Okeson stressed this. He put it in every presentation he did, regardless of what the topic was. Because he said that we give more violations for failure to samples than anything else, and bad labeling, and it's the paperwork that trips up a lot of operators. And so I have carried that tradition on, and no matter the presentation I've given, I have included a slide on how to label your samples, and so we will do that again today. Always, you're going to need to know your water system number, and that's always going to begin with Utah and then a 5-digit number. Know that number, have it imprinted on your brain. If you are interested in tattooing it on your body someplace to remember it, I'm open to that. Whatever it takes to get that memorized. It is all we have to know what your water system really is. Names change far too often. Names are far too similar. There's probably 100 systems in the state that begin with the word pine, and another 100 that are red rock, or I think there's something around 25 that use the word Zion. There's just a lot of very similar names, and we're not going to know the name of the system, but we can look it up by number, and you should know that, especially when you're taking it into your lab. Make sure that that is on that form someplace. Water system facility. Always, it's going to be DS001 for your distribution system samples. That is always the facility. Every water system in the state has one distribution system, and it is DS001. So all of those can be marked with that. They get trickier if you're doing source samples, because you're going to need to put something that's a WS00 for a water system source like a well or a spring. A source sample station, SS, is going to be if you have some group sources, or how's that differ from SSG and SS?
The SS is a combined entry.
Okay.
So if you have some springs coming down a mountain that combine into a storage tank, and you're sampling at that storage tank where they mix, that's an SS. The SSG is a groundwater sampling site location. So if you have been approved by Janet to sample at that combined entry for those springs for a triggered sample, then use SSG.
Perfect. Raw water is if it's a raw water sample, RW raw water. One of the trickier ones are these TPs. That's going to be a lot if it's a treatment plant sample for surface water. But a lot of times where it gets tricky is this SS is a TP, is that you have a sample tap at your treatment plant before it hits any of the treatment, that's where you can sample for that. And so logically, operators go, I sampled this at TP001, my chlorinator. And so they'll label it TP001 for that source sample. The problem is our database and we as humans do not recognize that that's where the sample is tied to. Your sample schedule is tied to this SS number right here. And so that's the number that our computer is going to look for.
Typically. many surface water systems have had the chem samples tied to the TP now.
Some do.
So check water link.
Yeah,
is
and
basically the moral of that
and that's
story.
always what we get back to is check water link.
Yeah.
And that's going to be correct because that's pulling from our database and that's what we're running compliance against. There are a few, if you have it tied to that treatment plant, I've seen it once or twice, but more often than not, it's just wrestling that logic from your brain that I was at my treatment plant, so why wouldn't I label it with my treatment plant versus I'm actually sampling at this SS point. And you have to kind of turn off your humanity for a moment and think like a computer. The computer can only see what it's told to look at. Water system facility sampling code, site sampling code, that's going to be mostly for DVPs. If you're a system that disinfects, you have the MR and the ME, which is maximum residual? Resident time,
midpoint.
and then midpoint in the distribution system. If you're a disinfection system, that's going to be somewhere in your distribution system, and it's going to be tied to your disinfection byproduct sample site plan.
The MR, it's actually maximum residence time.
That's what I thought. It's
Yeah.
like residence time,
Got that
residual
right.
time, residence time.
It's Monday.
We should probably put that with the acronyms. So that would have been helpful.
Sunday.
Right below, future us problems.
Yes.
DS, distribution system, TP, treatment plant, WS, water source, well, spring, tunnel. Even if it's an intake, I think we even list those for surface water as WS sometimes.
It depends.
It
Sometimes
depends.
it's RW, sometimes it's WS. Check your monitoring
Check
schedule.
your monitoring schedule. Sampling station and sample station for groundwater rule. And then RW is for raw water. And they use raw water samples for LT2. Is that the biggest one we use that for? Or do they use it for any of the others? So they need to label that.
For
The raw water designation.
it depends.
Just depends.
Again.
Check your monitoring schedule is going to be a recurring theme. Sampling basics, how to label. So how do I put all of those terms into a thing? If I'm taking a coliform sample, it's going to be DS001 or SSG for triggered samples, or WS if it's just at that single well or a single source. Throw that in there. Disinfection, DS001, and then M&R and MD. Lead and copper, always for the facility, DS001. Asbestos, DS001. Unique sampling, typically TP, raw water, or WS. Again, that's a big one to check your monitoring schedule or check with us because UCMR is not on their monitoring schedule. It's separate. At the source or entry point for the distribution system, it's going to be a WS, an SS, a TP, or an SSG for any. Would it be? Yeah, do you have an SSG for nitrate?
No.
No, only for coliform. Okay. Nitrate, nitrite, inorganics and metals, VOCs, pesticides, radionuclides, asbestos, and sulfate. Any of those groundwater sources, you're going to look and have it tied to that source. We have these great handouts. If you come to AWWA, we will have them available for you. It's a handy little card stock that tells you all of this information. Pin it up in your office, your truck, anywhere you're going to need to label a sample. Put it in your sampling folder, put it with your sample bottles, and then check it out and have it there so you have that as a handy reference. Ask us for it in Midway or anytime you see us out at a booth. Water system sample, this is for TC, meets TNI requirements. Okay, check here, you can see this sample, this sample label form. You're gonna have your water system here, your number, checking for I need to be on the screen, public system, private or well, you're not gonna worry about that because you're not regulating us. Your water system name here, the sampling point is DS001. You see that's still tied, and they have the street address, which we don't care about until there's a positive and we're checking it against the sample plan.
Always a good idea, though.
Yeah.
Always a good idea.
Nice to put it there.
Put it there, but it's nothing. We definitely need this more than this if you only have room for one, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Sample collected by, requirement, date and time, a 24-hour clock. The lab use, date, time, received. That's generally filled out by the lab a lot of the time when they bring it in. Unless you have a night drop, you can fill that out yourself. Condition on ice, checking yes or no. Temperature, these are all lab filled out, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Sampled per S1, protected from sunlight. These are all sort of check marks here. Sample chlorinated, yes or no. Good time to grab a Myrtle residual. Analysis needed, making sure you have the coliform. You'd use that fecal we no longer look at. This is a big one, making sure you check it correctly. Routine, a replacement for one that was indeterminate, or what's the word that they use at the lab, where they cancel it, basically say it doesn't meet the standard, not enough volume, too hot, too numerous to count. If it's a repeat sample, the biggest one I don't see here is there's not one listing triggered.
Yeah, it's rare.
So if this was a triggered sample, you would need to talk to your lab and say,
mark it as triggered. So
mark it as triggered.
It's really important, and we have to be very strict. If you mark it investigative, we will only accept it as investigative. If you mark it investigative, scribble it out, initial it, and mark it as routine, that's just a bad idea. That implies potential falsification of data. So mark it correctly one time. If you mark it as routine, we take it as routine. You can't mark it as a routine, have it come back positive and say, just kidding, I want this as an investigative sample. That's a no-go.
Yeah, and I think there was, one of my favorites is one of the labs in the state has up on the wall a sample that was on the check mark that said send to state, and someone had written send to state if it passes.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, that's a bad idea.
Don't do that.
Don't do that.
Don't be that.
Please.
Don't be that guy.
Yeah.
This is another example of the. This is an example of the chain of custody form. These become really important. You can see the state system here. It still works out with the UT. They don't have the AH. That's workable. We can deal with that. We care a lot about that 5 number because it's always going to be UTAH. We have the facility IDs listed here, where it was taken from, where the others were taken from, the sample locations, unit code. And this is a great example from a lab here in Salt Lake on what the chain of custody looks like. These become really important for reporting violations later on. If you don't have the results back, we can at least look at this and see that you've taken the sample. It's really important to maintain that in your records. Violations. Monitoring violations. The failure to take the routine sample or the failure to take the repeats or follow-up samples constitute what is called a monitoring violation. And prior to RTCR, monitoring and reporting violations were all considered the same. RTCR separated these 2 violations and created both monitoring and reporting violations.
And RTCR took place April 1st, 2016.
So it's been a while. Quality violations. Acute violations are confirmed E. coli contamination, the running annual average for chems, or mandatory health effects language. Reporting. If you've taken the violations and they never came to us, that's what constitutes a reporting violation. The failure to perform RTCR, seasonal startups, or assessments are also considered a reporting violation. If you're a seasonal system, you are required to report how you started up your system and how you did that to us. And if you fail to do so, that is considered a reporting violation. Like I said, these were separated. Have we see more of these, or do we see more just failure to take the sample, Janet?
Far more failure to take the sample.
Failure to take the sample?
Yeah.
Which ones are easier to fix?
The reporting.
The reportings.
Yeah.
Treatment technique. This is a federally created term. It doesn't always imply treatment, which is confusing, but it's the failure to conduct those assessments, the failure to correct the significant deficiency, or the failure to perform the seasonal startup at all constitutes a treatment technique violations. These are more serious. They're weighted more heavily as a health risk and thus constitute more points on the ETT that we talked about earlier, and on the IPS, especially on the revised IPS. I think we weighted these heavier. The failure to monitor. This is a lot of insider baseball when we talk about some of these codes. You'll hear us talk about the 3A violations. That's the major failure. You don't take any of your routine samples. That's 35 IPS points. 3A minor is the failure to take some of the samples. So you had to take 4 and you only took 2. The 34 failure is to take triggered samples, and that's you didn't take that groundwater. And those, I see a lot of those on enforcement orders, and they're one of the easier ones to fix, because you just got to go take that sample.
That's right.
Yeah. 19 is the failure to take the assessment samples at the source for groundwater, and that's the confirmed E. coli the 5 follow-up month. And that's 5 points on IPS. Now the failure to report. The 4B is the failure to report the violations by the 10th of the month following the following month. So you took all your samples, you just didn't get the results to the Division of Drinking Water. A lot of times water systems trust the labs to do that, and most of our labs do submit data to us directly now. We receive something in the neighborhood of 80% of our samples electronically. We're getting better at that. It's a continual area of improvement for us and to work with our labs to get those results in. But ultimately, we don't regulate laboratories. We cannot issue a violation to a laboratory for failure to submit the results to us. We regulate water systems, and the ultimate responsibility falls on the water system to get those results to us. Please check that IPS report and see that if the samples you took were submitted to us, and that if you're trusting your laboratory to do so, make sure that they have done so, and you can follow up with them and see where the results are in that process. You're also always welcome to submit to us official results through DDW reports and eventually through the portal, maybe? No, yeah, maybe. We'll see someday. Future problem.
Perhaps.
The 4A, the failure to report the level 1 assessment on time. So you did the level 1 assessment, you just didn't get the results of what you found. If you have questions on what a level 1 assessment is, there's webinars on that, as well as looking at anything on RTCR to tell you how to do a level 1. We have a lot on that. That becomes a 4C violation, or a 4A violation. A 4C violation is the failure to report the seasonal startup on time. So you did your startup, you just didn't tell us how you did it or what the results of that were and what you found. Those are failure to report. Quality, a 1A is a confirmed E. coli present. That's 50 IPS points. Treatment technique, a 2A is a failure to do a level 1 assessment. That's 40 IPS points. So you just didn't do the level 1. 2D is a failure to do the seasonal startup procedure. That's also 50 points. So how do you avoid these? Be aware that our deadline for compliance is the 10th of the month following the previous month. That's when we run violation and look for sample results and samples. It's 45 days after the end of the year for all chemical data. So 45 days into the new year is when we run that violation report. But you should just pretend it's the 10th and have everything in by the 10th at the end of the year. Have a good relationship with your lab. How do they submit the data to us? Ask how they get it here. Ask questions. You're a customer of a laboratory. You're not required to use any specific laboratory. You're required to use one that's certified, but there's multiple options to do so. Ask how they're getting it to us. Are they sending it to us electronically? Utah has a product called CMDP, Compliance Monitoring Data Portal. We were the first state in the country to get this up and working. Ask labs how they're doing that and getting it to us, and make yourself a savvy consumer. You leverage the power of the free market to ensure that the labs are getting the data to you and that they're providing the customer service to you. Fill out the chain of custody form correctly. If you're having questions about how to fill it out, ask. Ask the laboratory, ask us. And if the lab doesn't know, hopefully they are calling and asking questions on how to help people on that. But watch this webinar, call us up if you have questions on what goes where. And always, always be checking WaterLink. Check the bacteria summary, check the monitoring schedule, see that we have those samples you took. When I ran the nitrate rule, there was nothing more infuriating for water systems and myself than water systems that took their samples and they just never got reported in. They went out and they did the hard work of taking the sample, driving it to the lab, following proper sampling procedure, and then they still end up with a violation. They were angry, and generally justifiably so, but ultimately checking that WaterLink report would have confirmed that they should have triggered a problem for why we didn't have that sample results. One of the best comments I ever had from an operator was at the Rural Water Conference in St. George when he said, I only check IPS once a year before I come meet with you guys or right after a survey, because I check my monitoring report every single month so I know there's nothing on my IPS report. I know, it was by far, and this was an incredibly well-run system that has never had a problem because the operator was just checking that constantly.
Not that we don't want to talk to the operator.
Not that we don't want to talk to them, but we'd much rather talk to them about what's going on and have a nice little building relationship session versus saying, why isn't your nitrate sample here? So it was really vital. And if you learn how to use that, I promise you, your water system compliance will be much simpler for everybody involved. Connect with the rules section. Email. You can text Rachel. You can actually text me. My number's out there too. I've set up my phone to receive texts, phone calls on my mobile. We're happy to talk to you. I know it is often frustrating because we're not always at our desks. Right now I'm in Rachel's office, so if you're calling me now, you're not going to get straight to voicemail. But try and get a hold of us. We're pretty good about email. If you can't get a hold of one, you can call and ask who else you could talk to. There's almost always, we're pretty good at cross-training people. And if we're not, most of us are pretty good about saying, I don't know that, but I will make sure and have them get in touch with you. I've handwritten Post-it notes and stuck it on monitors and said, call this person back, because I don't know. I've done it to Janet. I've done it to Rachel. I think I've done it to everybody when I don't know. And it's a great way to just raise that attention. And we're pretty cognizant and aware that we want you to get your questions answered. So be in contact with us. We're not that terrifying.
Well, I mean,
we try to. Well, we try. We're only scary when we have to be. This is the bacteria report I talked about earlier on WaterLink. It's one that definitely confused me when I started at drinking water. And so it's one that if you look at it and it's confusing to you, don't feel scared about that. It is a little hard to understand what's going on there. But essentially what you're looking at is this first column is all your routine samples. And you can see the number of samples we've received here, and if they were positive here. Now, if they're positive here, it's important to go look at the next column. That's the repeat samples. And that's going to tell you the number of samples that you're supposed to take there and how many were received, and those results that'll show positive. Again, you can pop over one more column and you can see the triggered samples. That's that source sample that follows a positive TC, how many we received and what the results of those were. This is really tricky to understand at first, but once you know that you're just looking at the number of samples that the Division of Drinking Water has received, and then the results, and follow it along this path, it becomes a little easier to understand where you're at. And again, if you're having problems understanding it, call us. Janet can talk you through it. We can pull it up. She can pull it up on her screen and your screen, and we're happy to talk you through how to read this report. I think we've said it at least 25 times now to check your monitoring report. We'll probably say it another 25 times because it is simply one of the most important things to learn how to understand on WaterLink. You can see here the sample IDs we talked about for disinfection byproducts that you need to know where to label when you're filling out that sample form. You can see here the last date sampled and when the next sample is due. You can see that this system has a sample due next year and that they took one this year. If you look down here at lead and copper, it gives you the ID, the system ID or the facility ID that they're supposed to label. It's DS001. It's going to show when they last sampled of August 2018 and when their next due is all the way out in 2021. They have an asbestos sample here. They have to do one in the distribution system. They last did it in March of 2018, and they're not due again until the period between 2020 and 2028. So they have an 8-year schedule with which they can go through. This is recently up there. How long ago did we get chlorine residuals up there?
Oh gosh, earlier this year.
Earlier this year. I know it wasn't up there for a while, and this was troubling for systems because we've been telling them to check their WaterLink report forever, and then they had one that wasn't there. But it's there now. And you can look and see that they have the chlorine residuals need to be labeled as DS001. They're required to take 12. It's a routine sample. Their frequency is monthly. They last got them in September, and it's blank because that is every month.
And reporting is only every 3 months.
Right.
So we don't need your third quarter and residual averages until October 10th.
Right. You can see it it breaks down monitoring requirements by facility here. They have one at their treatment plant, TP004. They have an inorganics and metals, that one sample due. It's a routine labeling, all camps are. Frequency is every 9 years. They took their sample in May, and so they're not due until the period between 2020 and 2028. This is also really valuable if you're a water system operator who has to put together a budget for your water system and you're trying to figure out how much money it's going to cost you to take your samples. You can phase those out. You can see that this system has time periods between, they have an 8-year window that they're going to have to do these 2 samples, so they can space those 2 out to have less of an impact on any annual budget cycle, but have that in there to prepare if you have to present it to a city council or a city manager or a water board. You can help use that information to put together your budget going forward to plan the future of your sampling. All right, a quick introduction to the rules section staff. The surface water rule and your LT2 guru is Michelle Darris. Distribution residuals and DBPs are Randy Ryan. Total coliform rule and quality is Janet Lee. She's also your go-to for level 1 assessments, level 2 assessments, sampling site plans. What else do? You do lots of stuff. Is that it? Surveys? You still doing surveys?
No.
Level 2.
Just level 2s. Okay. Total coliform for monitoring and reporting is going to go to Satara Frederico. So if you've got some samples you don't know where they're at, call her and she can help you talk through what's going on there. Nitrate, arsenic, and rads is Emily Frary. Lead and copper rule is Matt Wyckoff. Enforcement lead is me. But if you followed all these other stuff, hopefully you never have to talk to me unless it's happy, fun time, mocking my pants, something like that. CCR rule and enforcement is Brandy Smith. IPS rule is Jennifer Yee. Database admin is Dallin Frank. Office specialist is Tammy Allen. She can always find and track down the rest of us. So if you can't get someone, it's a good one to call and say, where's Colt? And the rules section manager is Rachel Cassidy. Also a good one to call and say, oh, I can't find this person. Help me.
Or just text me.
Text is better. She really is stressing the text.
Please.
Please.
Yes, and be good to my people.
Yeah. Be good to us. Mock, ingest, and love only. You want your CEUs. The link is posted. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll have to click the show more button, click that link, and answer 2 short questions along with your normal survey information. I know those questions for those of you who are regular watchers are probably getting repetitive by now, but you're building a really lovely data set for how well we know rules and for help us target where we need to go next.
And you're totally on top of what's going on at the division.
You are totally on top of what's going on at the division. Our next webinar will be late October. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover, let us know.
Or if you want to
do one, you have something cool you're doing, let us know.
Please.
We are always open to new presenters and new ideas. Thank you all. We look forward to talking to you in October, and we'll see some of you before then.
Thank you.